Nevertheless, I saw David again 2 weeks later, and he had completely destroyed the second cast to a degree that I've never seen in my life. And he ended up by saying, I put on many walking casts in my life that last 4 to 6 weeks, but I'm not able to make an indestructible cast. So, that kind of describes my life growing up in high school. Wild. And I grew up in the LCA, which now is ELCA, the Liberal Lutheran Church body. And so because the ELCA was so liberal even back then, I was not given a good foundation for my baptismal grace. And then, in high school, you figure out what sins are really fun to engage in, and you fell in love with sin, and you become enslaved to sins. And, it was a sad time, but I also was purposely very, very disrespectful towards my parents, and I purposely chose to distance myself from them. I hurt them in many, many ways during those years. But because of my religious upbringing, because of my love for sin, because of, I don't know if you want to connect to my wildness, which would have been just poor stewardship or whatever, I became an agnostic, which means I don't know if there is a God. And I said to myself, if there is a God, he's probably a combination of the major religions in the world. And I thought this was really cool, this worldview, this religion I was developing in my head. So that's where I was in high school. I love sports. I played all the sports, didn't play very much at all. I kind of matured a little bit late. I started playing soccer not until 9th grade. Just played on the teams that they had in high school there. My senior year, I finally made it to the varsity team. We had a large school. My graduating class was over 900, so very competitive. But I never played, even my senior year, until my second to last game. And in that second last game, I played, the coach said, get in there, middle defense. The guy's messing up, so I got in there to play that second last game, and I played well. And so at the end of the game, the coach gave me the Player of the Game award. So he said, you're going to start your last game. So I started my last game my senior year. The only game I played the whole game. I hardly played it all before this. And I played well again and got the same award again. And out in the crowd that night, there was a coach from a college. And the coach was Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. And he got in touch with me and my parents, and he said, I'd like to come over and talk to you about coming to Bethany. So we had him over. His name was Mike Butterfield. I don't know if any of you know Mike Butterfield. Maybe not. It's been a while. So he came to our house, and he said, one of the first things he did was he asked me and my parents 2 questions. He said, if you died today, would you be sure of going to heaven? And the second question was, if you did die today and God said to you, why should I let you into my heaven, what would you say? And so I thought, this guy is really, really weird. But he did offer me a $200 scholarship to come play soccer in Bethany. And so, being the arrogant punk that I was, I said, oh, okay, I'm going to go. I was planning to go as far away as possible. I wanted to go to, my first choice was the University of Alaska. Climb mountains or whatever, get away. But, here was something to brag about. So I went to Bethany. And I found out when I got there that I think just about every professor there was just as strange as this soccer coach. They all believed that the Bible was really true, without error. And most of the students at that time believed the same thing too. And then you had to go to chapel every day back then. You had to take a religion class every semester. It was a junior college at that time. And the first college religion course I took was called The Case for Christianity. It was an apologetics course. And so I was being challenged right away with the truth for Christianity, the evidence. And, I don't remember everything that I was studying back then, but it obviously made a huge impact on me, along with the chapel, along with my discussions and sometimes arguments with fellow students. So, to make a long story short, because that evidence was right there in front of me that said, this is true, this is not true. And I remember very clearly, it was on a Wednesday evening when every other student was at the midweek Lenten service at Mount Olive Lutheran Church down the street. And I was just wandering around outside on Mulberry Street and just thinking about these things. And there were two basic questions. And I'm kind of jumping ahead here on the outline. Two basic questions that God was confronting me with at that point. And the two questions are these. Who am I? And who is Jesus Christ? Okay? And I just remember very vividly that I, at that point, was saying to myself, I am a great sinner. And Jesus Christ is exactly who he claimed to be. So, at that point, I won't tell you how many years ago now, it was 50 years ago, I was brought back to my baptismal grace. And that's part of the reason why I've taken a great interest in apologetics and worldviews ever since. So, it's so important for us to realize that there's all kinds of people out there that need to be victims of apologetics. People who need to hear not just the gospel, but also the evidence for the truth of Christianity. And I'm not sure how well we do. And that's why we have this center. So we can help people understand the tremendous value of apologetics. And also to help them understand the danger of so many worldviews that are out there. So we talked about those two questions. Who am I? Who is Jesus Christ? And there's a lot of other questions, of course, connected to that. So, thoughts? Questions? Otherwise, we'll just keep. How are we doing? How late did we go here?
Just keep going.
Oh.
No.
3:30 was it?
About 3:30, yeah.
Okay. So if I see you falling asleep, I'll do something strange and wild. Okay, so. What's that?
Just so I can see.
Get your phone, sleep, see what you do.
Two ways to categorize apologetics, biblical and extra-biblical. So let's just talk briefly about extra-biblical apologetics. Here's a definition I have for it. Evidence or defense that comes from outside of Scripture. So there's things out there outside of Scripture, and I might give you an example here in just a minute. I think I will. I think we might have time for it. And there's all kinds of extra-biblical apologetics, and I won't go into detail about any of these right now. But I think what I'll do maybe with what might be most helpful is just to give you an example. This is a video I made a while ago for Peace Devotions in North Mankato, Minnesota. And this is an example of using extra-biblical apologetics. So I hope this works here now.
The one that I want to deal with today is the comment that had to do with the existence of Jesus. The comment was this: frankly, you don't even have any evidence for Jesus. There's no evidence for the existence of Jesus. What would you say? We might be tempted to say, well, the Bible says that he existed. The problem with that, of course, is that these people, maybe yourself included, if you're one of these people, you don't believe in the reliability of the Bible. It's perhaps just a book of fables and myths and fiction. So the question that can be asked is, are there any other sources out there, non-Christian sources,
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to be looking at me here.
So secular sources.
No, babe, how do we get, it's not there. Was it on there at first?
No.
Okay.
Probably
Let's
in
see.
the browser.
It might be.
I just gotta go here. No?
Put this down and then put other screen on. Then I can go. There you go. Yep.
That deal with the existence of Jesus? And the answer is yes. There's plenty of the comment is this.
Let me just preface this by saying something too. So these peace devotions that are put on, anybody watch the peace devotions? They're awfully good. But sometimes it would get some negative feedback to these devotions, and one of the feedbacks was, you don't even have any proof that Jesus existed. So I said, and they asked me to deal with that, so I did.
Frankly, you don't even have any evidence for Jesus. There's no evidence for the existence of Jesus. What would you say? We might be tempted to say, well, the Bible says that he existed. The problem with that, of course, is that these people, maybe yourself included, if you're one of these people, you don't believe in the reliability of the Bible. It's perhaps just a book of fables and myths and fiction. So the question that can be asked is, are there any other sources out there, non-Christian sources, secular sources, that deal with the existence of Jesus? And the answer is yes. There's plenty of sources out there, up to 24, but let me just mention several of them for us today. You have the historian, the Jewish Roman historian by the name of Josephus. He talks about Jesus twice. You have the Roman historian Tacitus. He mentions Jesus. You have the historian, another Roman historian by the name of Suetonius, another by the name of Thallus. You have a historian by the name of Lucian. He also engaged in satire, and we talked about his history. You have a government authority by the name of Pliny the Younger. You have a man who, while he was in jail, wrote a letter to his son talking about the existence of Jesus. And this was the end of the 1st century. And then also, I think what's very important is you have the Jewish Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, which was written anywhere from 70 to the end of the 2nd century. And this Talmud talks about Jesus as a sorcerer who was performing some sort of magic or miracles, leading Jewish people astray. He was put to death by hanging, and he was put to death on the Passover. So you have these and all other kinds of non-Christian sources out there talking about the existence of Jesus. So all these speak of his death, most of them by crucifixion, they mention that. They were trusted historians. They were those who were neutral towards Christianity. Most of them were, you could classify as enemies of Christianity. So you have all these sources saying the same thing, that he existed. To put it another way, if your enemies say you existed, you probably existed. But then we come to another testimony, one that many people don't want to accept at this point, and maybe you're one of those, and that's okay. I ask you to consider this. And that's the New Testament source. Actually, it's not just one source. It's 27 sources all in one volume we call the New Testament. And I believe that the New Testament is inspired and inerrant, and I'm not asking any unbelievers out there to accept that at this point. But I would challenge them with this question. Are these sources, in any sense, to any degree, historically reliable? They claim to be written by those who were either eyewitnesses or those who had contact with the eyewitnesses. And they all say the same thing, just like the non-Christian sources say, that he was living, he talked, he walked, he preached, he died. And so it's worth considering whether or not these Christian sources are historically reliable. So the question that should be asked is not, did he exist? Because the verdict is very clear. Whether you're talking about the New Testament sources or you're talking about non-Christian sources, whether you're talking about those who were followers of Jesus, or those who were his enemies, those who believed in the miraculous, or those who thought Christianity was just a bunch of what, they all say the same thing. They all conclude that he really existed. And so the question is not, did he exist? But the crucial question, the really crucial question is, who is this man that existed? I would like to deal with that at more length in another episode, but I would like to say one thing about that particular question right now for your thought. If you're a Christian, to encourage you that these questions can be answered. If you're not a Christian, to consider these answers. When Jesus was crucified and he died, the last thing any of his disciples expected to find was Jesus alive again, fully alive 3 days later. But then these reports started sneaking out that some people had seen him alive. And the disciples just wrote it off for the most part. But then all of a sudden, on that Sunday, he appeared to 10 of them. And here's how one of the sources reports that event. And this report was written by a man named Newman, a doctor, a physician, who relied on those who were eyewitnesses at the time. This is what he wrote. They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet, as I myself. Touch me and see. The ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything here to eat?" He gave them a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Now, they were all present. One of them that was not present at the time was one of the disciples called Thomas. And so here we're reading another account of a man who was an eyewitness. He said, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.' A week later, his disciples were in the house again. Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it to my side. Stop doubting and believe.' Thomas said to him, 'My Lord and my God.'" And then John the writer concludes that chapter by saying, "Jesus performed many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name."
Okay, I just want to make one comment about that. And this is so important when it comes to the subject of apologetics. Again, apologetics, when it's done right, should direct people to Christ. We're just not trying to convince people of certain facts and historical events, but ultimately to Christ and who he is and what he did, and why he did what he did. So, there is a case of extra biblical apologetics where I use sources outside of Christianity to confirm that he really existed. I think something like that can be valuable to certain people. All right, let's go back here, unless you have any thoughts or questions right now. What's interesting is that particular video on the website, it attracted a lot of people. A lot of people clicked on it and watched it. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, people are interested in apologetics. All right, now I'm going to go to biblical apologetics. And a good place to start is with the claims of Christ. And I'll probably talk about this tomorrow in the sermon too, because this is just a fascinating subject. But here's some other things we want to touch upon today as well. The evidence. What is the evidence? Well, you have Jesus fulfilling these prophecies found in the Old Testament. I'm not going to spend any time on this today except to say that, the Jews generally understood that their Holy Scriptures contained identification marks of the Messiah to come. And they weren't always clear on who this Messiah would be. Sometimes they thought, well, he's going to be two different people or something like that. But at the time of Christ, and shortly before then, and definitely after that, there was this, you might say, a fever for trying to find out if the Messiah was coming. And yet, what they often missed was Jesus fulfilling these predictions, these prophecies of the Messiah. And the greatest one, of course, is Isaiah chapter 53, where it talks about his atoning suffering and death for the sins of the world. We have messianic prophecies. We have the miracles, which we touched upon already to some degree. I think I might mention one more thing about this later on. We have the resurrection, or maybe more appropriately, the appearances of the resurrected Christ, not just the resurrection. Because it's one thing, if you think about it, to say he rose from the dead, believe it, but it's another thing to say, but there were appearances of his resurrection. And then we have eyewitness testimony, an extremely valuable part, an important part of the New Testament. So these are what we call evidences. So let's talk about the claims of Christ just a little bit here. This is something we are tempted to take for granted. So let me explain it to you this way. You and I are walking down the street together, and I turn to you and I say, and you don't know me very well, let's say, and I say to you, do you know that God the Father sent me? And you look at me and you smile politely. And then I say something like, you know that Sabbath day thing? That's mine. I'm the master of the Sabbath day. I know what it's all about.
911.
And then I say to you, oh, by the way, I have this tremendous ability to forgive sins. And you say to me, well, what sins? Well, everybody sins. And you begin to realize, hey, he thinks he's serious. And then I say to you, someday I'll die, and I'll go to heaven, but I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back so everybody can see me, and I'm going to come back with the most tremendous power, and I'm going to have my angels with me, these thousands and thousands they're my angels. Now remember, we're walking down the road together, and you begin to realize that I think I'm really serious. So, what do you think about me? 911? 911, okay. So
I did have somebody tell me that, and I took them to the ER.
yeah, there are people out there who claim to be God, and it happens.
Yeah.
And
It was very pleasant.
But we don't say what they're saying about themselves is true, do we? We come to another conclusion. Might be some problems. Sorry. So when we look at the responses to Jesus, he makes these claims about himself. In fact, I counted up the claims in each of the Gospels, and I would encourage you to do this. Don't look at that yet.
A little late.
So, in the Gospel of Matthew, there are 46 outrageous claims made by Christ. In Mark, 32 outrageous claims. In Luke, 72. In the Gospel of John, over 100 outrageous claims that either Jesus makes about himself or somebody else does, the apostles. So we shouldn't take these claims for granted. because they're there. And go through, and I do this. I mark up my Bible quite a bit. Go to just a couple chapters in one of the Gospels and look for the claims of Christ. What is he saying about himself? Put a little CL next to it. And then add them up. And normal people do not say these things about themselves. Nobody in their right mind, you might say, would say these things about themselves. You know, we take it for granted because we believe the Bible. It says he's the Son of God. Okay, we believe that. But those things are outrageous. I remember, I've done this several times. One time I was in the plane and I was talking to the man next to me, and he had grown up Christian. And I explained to them these outrageous claims of Christ. And I said, these are outrageous, aren't they? He said, yeah, I've never thought about it that way before. So you go back to the New Testament, the Gospels, and what did they say? Well, the Jews said one of three things, and sometimes they combine them together. They said, this guy is a blasphemous liar. Right? They said, or he's demon-possessed, or he's insane. And if you think about it, all three of those conclusions are very legitimate conclusions based on the claims of Christ, unless he really was who he claimed to be. But nobody should ever come to the conclusion, oh, this is a great man, a great moral teacher. No, no, no. If he really said those things about himself, he's either a blasphemous liar, he's a lunatic, or he's demon-possessed. Those are legitimate understandings. Or he is who he claimed to be, right? All right, so here we have this, I'm assuming there's some C.S. Lewis fans here, maybe, and here's what C.S. Lewis says. I'm trying to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let's not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. And Lewis was an atheist for the first, well, until his late 20s. And he started thinking about these things. He became one of the greatest Christian apologists of all time, C.S. Lewis. And some of you are familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, and maybe other books too of his. But yeah, he had a great way of explaining things. And just one more thing here I'll mention about the claims of Christ. One night I was listening to a podcast probably about 8 years ago or so. And it was a Christian minister who had this podcast. He was interviewing somebody else. And they were talking about Christ and his claims. And the minister who conducted the interview said that he remembered a time when he went to a psychiatric hospital to visit. He said he walked into that psychiatric hospital. This is a true story. And a resident patient in the hospital came up to him and said, "Do you know that I am the second Son of God?" And the pastor said, "No, I didn't know that, but how do you know that?" And the man said, "God told me." And then another patient from across the room said, "No, I didn't." So again, that's what we're dealing here with the claims of Christ. You know, either he was who he claimed to be.
To clarify, I'm a psychologist, just so you know. So, my story earlier was true.
Have you heard of this one before?
No, this is not a story I've
So
heard.
this one
That's a
flew
good
over
one.
the cuckoo's nest?
No.
Yeah, it's a true story. So it's, but again, this is the sort of thing Jesus would walk around saying, many times indirectly, sometimes a little more directly. You know, when he said to the Jews, before Abraham was born, I am, the Jews knew exactly what he was saying at that point. And they said, we got to get rid of this guy. We got to kill him. He's blaspheming. Sorry, let's keep going here. So we have messianic prophecies, we have miracles, we have his resurrection, we have his eyewitness testimony. I want to make a few comments here about his miracles that I haven't made yet. This is fascinating. This is something else we take for granted, his miracles. And so let me explain it to you this way. In the Gospel of Matthew, we have, was it 7 or 8 different sections where it talks about not just one miracle, but a bunch of miracles he performs at a certain location or to a large group of people. So if you look at these different, you take that second one there. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out spirits with the word and healed all who were sick. You know, we're not talking about 3-4 people here. If you look at the context of these different sections here, we're looking at many, many people that were healed by Jesus. If I were to give a conservative estimate for each of these, it would be 50 people in each. That's conservative. 50 times 6 is, well, except for the number 5 there. When he went to his hometown, he didn't perform many, maybe just a dozen there, okay? But if you consider 50 in each of those other instances, and that's a low estimate, you know, what do you got? 50 times 5, 250. But then you have these other two also, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. I'm not talking about each person being fed as a miracle, but you look at what happened before he performed the miracle of feeding the 5,000, the 4,000. You see that, for example, there's a large crowd. Compassion healed their sick. Same thing with Matthew 15. So you got 5,000 men at the first one, 4,000 men at the second one, but then you also have the women and the children. So you could easily double that. Let's say 15,000, 12,000, whatever, okay? So a total of maybe 25,000, something like that, in these two occasions. And he's healing. How many? Well, we don't know how many for sure. What if it was just 1% that needed healing? That'd be 250 people, right? I mean, that's a lot of miracles. So you add that together with the previous sections, and you come up with a minimum of 500 miracles, again, minimum, over a 3-year period. And what are you looking at? You're looking at one miracle every other day. And then you ask yourself, is there any other religion like this? Nothing comes close. You know, other religions have supposed miracles that happen, and maybe they did. We don't know how. But you have nothing like this. You know, in the Old Testament,